let me just say who I am. This is Andrew Linnell, and I've taken on this task on behalf of Andre and the group in Chicago who have been bringing these Holy Night celebrations to you. This is scheduled to be the last of the Holy Night celebrations, but it's not quite a Three Kings gift, but it's a gift nonetheless. One of the speakers, Andrew Wolperts, will be back again tomorrow. It will be 7 o'clock his time, and he will be speaking of the coming of the kings and the baptism, an exploration of the theme illustrated in the works by Botticelli, Leonardo, Piero della Francesca, and perhaps some others. So 7 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, 7 o'clock p.m. is, I believe, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, which would be 1 o'clock Central Time, or 11 o'clock Pacific Time, noon Mountain Time. And for those in other places, which we have lots, I hope you can figure out what's the right time to join us tomorrow. It's wonderful, I think, to have such a worldwide audience. You know, with COVID, many of us are not only having to wear masks in public, but not being in public very much. And I find that these Holy Night celebrations that we've had have created quite a community. And I'm very grateful to the Chicago branch for initiating this work that, as you can all see, has reached a worldwide audience. So Johannes, when he was head of the natural science section, used to help us all come to grips with using phenomena in our talks and in our discussions and in our scientific works. Johannes continues to do that. I've been so impressed with the talks he's given, where he leads one from the phenomena to conclusions. And I greatly admire that patience and all that he brings. He was born a little bit after me in 1953 in Hamburg. But as I pointed out, we still share, I think, because that era, everybody loved ice cream. We have some other stories about that. So after Waldorf School in civil service and agriculture and studying of physics, mathematics, and chemistry in Hamburg and Göttingen, and he then subsequently became a senior teacher at the Waldorf School in Stuttgart from roughly, I think it was 1982 to 96. He joined the natural science section and became a research collegium in 1982. And then from 1996 to 2019, he was head of this section. And then he stepped back recently, and another Johannes Wirtz and Matthias Rang are together leading that natural science section today. He has continued his work for the School of Spiritual Science and is the author of a number of books. One that I own is called Rainbows, Halos, Dawn, and Dusk, about the appearance of color in the atmosphere, and then helping us to see this in the context of Goethe's theory of colors. So with that, I want to welcome to this last of our Holy Night celebrations, Johannes Kühl, and with a warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And thank you for not telling the ice cream episode today. And welcome everybody else out there, wherever you are, and thank you for joining us this evening. And before I really begin, I would like to tell you a little bit, you will see why little bit later, I would like to tell you a little bit how this lecture came about. Because when last summer, I think, or spring, Andre asked me for a lecture during the Holy Nights, I told him that I'm not the right person for that. I'm a physicist and an anthroposophist, and I work with the seasons, of course, and the festivals, but that's not really my topic. But Andre insisted, and he said, you can just tell us again about Goethe's Initiation, which I did a few years ago in Chicago branch live. And he said, you can just tell us that story again. And I thought I would never do that. But I looked up a little bit about that and looked at a lecture by Rudolf Steiner again around this theme. And then something came up. And about that, I would like to tell you again, to tell you today. And so the main question in the beginning of something like this is there a message from Christmas which is relevant for our time? Or is it only, of course, we all know it's not because of the presents, but it is because of joy and hope and be nice to each other and family reunions and things like that. But is there a deeper message which is, so to speak, showing itself in this joy and presence and family reunions and things like that, which is showing itself there? And I would like to tell you about one of these, or one message which became relevant for me or to me during the last year. And one message, of course, is the adoration of the child. And we should think of childhood, especially in this time of the pandemic, where in a way the children suffers most of all of us. In a way, it's difficult to say who suffers the most, but children suffer from that. I had a friend who told me his daughter had only a few weeks, I think 3 or 4 weeks of school last year. So they do suffer. And then, of course, there is another message, which is the message of peace towards the shepherds. In English, I think it is, revealed be God in the heights, and peace to men of goodwill on earth. The original Latin, so an old Latin translation is Gloria in excelsis Deo et in terra pax hominibus bone voluntatis. And there are some questions about the translation, but I don't want to go into that now. And today, we can realize that we are quite far away from peace. So even after more than 2000 years, we are far away from peace. Of course, there were worse times during the world wars, but even today, I looked that up, in 2020, around 250,000 people died in armed conflicts during the year. That seems not that much compared with other deaths, but in addition, we have about 85 millions of refugees over the earth. That is about a quarter of the population of the US. And it's about the same amount as the population of Germany. And many of these are refugees because of war. And when we look into the reasons of the war, many of them have a reason out of religious beliefs, at least on the surface. So when we think of the Middle East, for example, nobody would risk his life for this black, stinking stuff called oil. So they had to fight for their belief, and the possession of oil is in the background. And so that is one side, and the other side, of course, are ethnic conflicts. And these are the most important reasons of conflicts in the world. And we can ask ourselves, what was the meaning, the outcome of this message of peace from the angels? And I would like to mention that there is a very good and beautiful to read lecture by Jürgen Smith. It was the last lecture he gave in 1990 on New Year's Eve at the Goetheanum, and he died in 91 in May. So it was one of his last lectures, and there he looks at this message in that way that he said, what is the first part of the message? Revealed be God. And what is the second part, the third part? To man of good will. What does it mean, good will, and to reveal God, like a necessity for this peace to come up? The lecture is written and recorded by people, but only in German, and I tried to translate it with DeepL, but that didn't work because of the PDF I had. So I can only quote it, but I wanted to mention that there is some work about this message. And today I would like to look at this message of peace too, but with a slightly different direction. So we look at these reasons that many of these conflicts have this religious background. And when we think about religion, many of us don't think it is that important. And even some anthroposophists say we don't need religion. And that is I would like to question that. What we probably don't need, or many of us wouldn't need, is a sort of confession, like being Catholic or being Lutheran or something like that. But that is different from a deeper aspect of religion, and I will come to that. And why is it that we have these different religions in the world, on earth, like Muslim and Christians and the different streams in Christians, the different streams in Muslim, the different streams in Buddhism, and so on. Indigenous mysteries. So why is it that we have this great differences around this religious theme? And I found by a friend, a good friend who gave me that, a quite interesting aspect why religion is in a way something deeper than, or how religion is something deeper than we believe in that, or we believe in that, or we believe in that. And that comes from an Catholic Benedictine monk who is very active in inter-religious dialogue. His name is David Stendel. I have to look it up. Russ, and I will give you a list with my quotes in the end. And he wrote a book about the creed, and it's quite interesting. And I would like to show it, the quote I would read to you. Now you should be able to see it. Is it true? I hope so. So
yes, it's there. We see it.
Fine, thank you. The book is called From Deeper Than Words, or Deeper Than Words, David Steindl-Rast. And he speaks about the creed. And as you might know, it begins with I believe. And when he goes on, he wrote, when the I speaks here believes, this means infinitely more than accepting an unproven proposition as likely. I think that's quite good. It is rather an expression of unconditional trust. Only when we know that this is what believing means, can we understand which I is speaking here. And a little bit later, our little ego, which we often mean when we say I, is incapable of the courageous trust of faith. Isn't that interesting? Because one can think that's written by an anthroposophist. The two I's, or the ego and the I, and this unconditional trust as an underlying force for religion. That is just my introduction to the problem. Sorry. And now I would like to take a maybe surprising turn and look at Goethe and the German poet. And from the beginning of my talk, you know why this comes about, because Andre directed me to this initiation of Goethe. And Goethe wrote a poem, which I didn't mention in the last lectures, and it is called The Mysteries, in English, Die Geheimnisse. And it's a very long poem, therefore I didn't write it up because nobody could read it in a few minutes. And in this poem, he describes a young man who is walking through the landscape to a monastery quite remote in the country. And on the gate on the entrance of the monastery, he saw a rose cross, a cross with roses. And then he is invited in, and there he meets 12 men. And he is invited to that meeting, 12 men, and each one of these 12 men represents one of the religions of the world. So they create a sort of brotherhood of all the religions of the world, and they were led, or they had a sort of leader or guide, an older man, and his name was, or is in the poem, Humanus. So that is a Latin word for human being. So in a way, Goethe called him a representative of man. And so they have this brotherhood of the religions, and Goethe had this image and worked on that, but he never could finish this poem. And it was, as he wrote himself, just too big, just too great. But this brotherhood is there as an ideal. Now, I hope this will help. Thank you. Now it is interesting to look where this came from, how this ideal came up in Goethe's life. And for that, we come to this question of Goethe's initiation, because he wrote this poem in, and I will show that to you, so it's not only listening. He wrote that in August 1784. At least he started it at that time. So he was born in 1749, and then he was 35 years old. And there he wrote two important poems, The Mysteries and the poem Dedication. And this poem, Dedication, or Zueignung in German, was meant as a sort of preface for the mysteries. And this dedication was so important to him that later he put that in front of all his other poems. So it was, so to speak, the introduction, the preface for all his other poems. And again, it's too long to read it to you, and I will just mention that. And now one can ask, where did they come from? And then we can go 7 years earlier, and that is in December 1777. Goethe is 28 years old, and that was his first trip to the Harz Mountains. And there he had, amongst other, two very strong experiences. One was, the first one, he was with a guide in an abandoned mine, so in a cave deep under the earth, no electric light at that time. And then suddenly a rock broke free above them, and it hit the guide a little bit, but he could manage it. But Goethe writes to his friend Charlotte von Stein, a moment later, I would have stood there under it and it would have crushed me. So he had an experience like close to death. And only a few days later, I think 3 days, he wanted to go on the summit of the Brocken, the highest mountain there. And it was difficult to get there. Nobody wanted to guide him because it's winter and ice and so on, and mist around the summit. But finally, the mist went away and he found someone who guided him up. So he was there, and he wrote that there he offered his biggest gratefulness to his God. And then he writes, and we only know about this because he wrote about it in letters to Charlotte von Stein, not in any other work. He wrote that he can't tell her what he experienced by writing. It needs to wait until they meet again. So it was a very deep experience, so deep that 1 year later, he wrote again to Charlotte to memorize so to speak, the anniversary of this event. So it was a sort of religious experience, and these two come together, the mind, the darkness, the death, and the bright light on the mountain. Now we can look at that and we can see that walking down from the Brocken, Goethe discovered the colored shadows. So it is something of darkness and light and in between the colors, and everything is nice. But what makes it important to me is that there is a lecture by Rudolf Steiner in January, 5th of January 24, and we can stop this. 5th of January 24, and there Rudolf Steiner describes some of the last initiation in the medieval time in the 12th century. And what is astonishing is the main parts of this initiation are that the student, and Steiner said, imagine a young man, 25 to 28 years old, so exactly Goethe's age, a young man, and he was led up onto a mountain to have a spiritual experience there, and then down into an abandoned mine under the earth for a certain spiritual experience there. So this initiation is nearly the same as what Goethe experienced a few hundred years later. And that made it astonishing. And now we know that when Goethe had a very deep experience, he tried to process it, to work through it artistically. And so one can look, is there anything where we can learn something about this or these two experiences? And then when we look 7 years later, he wrote these two poems. And when he worked on them, he was on a trip to the Harz Mountains again. It was his third trip. And actually the dedication he worked on in a restaurant, because his carriage was broken and he had to wait for someone to repair it. And so he sat there and wrote this poem. It's funny sometimes that we can know nearly every day from Goethe's life. So, and one can think, and that's not only me who thinks that, but several people who worked on Goethe, that this, especially the dedication, but these two belong together, that there came, so to speak, this working through the experience from 7 years ago. And that is how he tried to process it artistically. And when you look at that way, you see that this idea of the brotherhood of all the religions around the world, which we find in the mysteries, that this idea has, so to speak, its origin in, yes, how can we say that, in a sort of remembering in an initiation which actually was the beginning of the Rosicrucian movement. This initiation of the 12th century, Rudolf Steiner describes as the beginning of the Rosicrucian movement. And Goethe has like a sort of memory or of that in his life, so not an inner memory, but an experience in his life. And out of that came this ideal of a brotherhood of all these religions. So maybe now you get a little bit impatient, because this has so far nothing to do with Christmas or the Holy Nights. But there is a lecture where Steiner spoke exactly about this poem, The Mysteries, and that was from the 25th of December, so Christmas Day of 1907, so nearly 20 years earlier than these lectures about the Rosicrucian initiation. But here again, he spoke of Rosicrucian schools and how they lasted in, so to speak, in the last phases into the 18th and 19th, the beginning of the 19th century. That's exactly Goethe's lifetime. And the ultimate initiation in this school was taking place in the time when the outer sun is lowest, weakest, in midwinter. And so the initiation process was connected with the rhythms of the earth. And it took place at midnight. So at midnight in winter time. And there now we have the connection to Christmas. And when it was possible for the student, for the pupil, then he was led to experience something very special, which is, so in the midnight, all the outer light has disappeared. It is dark. Maybe one can see the stars, but in this darkness, the pupil could learn how the earth became transparent. And in a sort of spiritual experience, he could experience the sun shining through the earth. And even the color is described. It's like a bluish violet, how the sun is shining through the earth, and how the student experienced in this spiritual light of the sun, the spiritual being of the sun connected with the earth, connecting with the earth, the Christ connecting with the earth. So it was a sort of Christian initiation, and I will read to you a part from this lecture. Which is then the mystery novice was led to a vision of the greatest importance. As long as the earth is opaque, the separate parts appear inhabited by people of different confessions. But the unifying bond is not there. Human races are as scattered as the climates. Human opinions are scattered all over the earth, and there is no collecting link. But in the degree in which men begin to look through the earth into the sun by their inner power of vision, in the degree in which the star appears to them through the earth, their confessions will flow together to one great united brotherhood. So we see this Rosicrucian experience, or the experience in the last Rosicrucian mysteries, to see the sun at midnight, arises this ideal of the interreligious brotherhood. And in this lecture, Steiner then goes from there to Goethe and describes this poem, The Mysteries, and even quotes, I think Marie Steiner had recited it, or yes, and the whole poem is possible to find in this lecture. So we see there is something coming out from this Rosicrucian initiation which throws a new light, at least a special light, on Christmas and the Holy Nights. And this is that what is cared for through all the esoteric Christianity, that is to bring together these different religions into a sort of brotherhood. And when we look at that, we can see that is a deep impulse of the Christian esoteric and the Rosicrucian esoteric.
What the fuck?
That this impulse of bringing together different streams, sort of bringing together polarities, even something we can find how Rudolf Steiner described the Michael school. When you, for these of you who know these lectures, in this school, Michael brings together these different streams of Platonics and Aristotelic souls to teach them together. And then we have the time, so to speak, the dark time on the earth, where only the Rosicrucian school lives on earth, and the Michael school is super sensible. And then comes Steiner, and one of his first books is about Goethe, but looking at Goethe with the method of Schiller, who was quite opposite to Goethe, but he looked at him. So two opposites brought together. And when you look in Steiner's work, you find this quality of bringing together opposites, bringing together different streams to work together. You find that as one of the important impulses up to the esoteric school founded in 1923 and 24, where in this school are brought together the super sensible Michael school and the earthly Rosicrucian school. And before that, he spoke about bringing together karmic streams and so on. So that is a deep impulse of esoteric Christianity and the Michael school. And then looking back at Christmas, we can see that there we have this inspiration already of bringing different parts of mankind together. For example, look at the kings. We have these three kings coming to the newborn child, and in the tale it is one coming from Asia, one from Africa, one represents Europe. So even there, sorry, there's no one from America, but even there we have this coming together of representatives of mankind to this child, for the adoration of this child. Or when we look further, we can see they are not only the kings, they are the shepherds. The kings are the people who were wise, who know about the stars and about, in a way, mathematics. But the shepherds are the people who work on the earth, who tend for their sheep, and so on. So we have, so to speak, the practical side and the wisdom side of mankind brought together. And that again is a Rosicrucian impulse, as we can see in other lectures of Rudolf Steiner. And everybody today everybody who looks at a child, at a young, maybe newborn child, can experience something of mankind and something of this, I'm like to say, religious inspiration. And one aspect is, I once read that the magenta color is the color of the human being incarnate. And when I looked at my face, I never saw that color in human beings, in white human beings. So I thought about that, and maybe that's a little bit, yes, overdone. But when I first saw actually a newborn child which took its first breath, then before that, the skin was a little bit bluish because of the lack of oxygen. And then with the first breath, the skin turned magenta. And I talked about that to students, and they said, yes, but that is a little bit racistic, because what is it with other races? So I did some research on that, and the thing is, every child, whether it gets black later or yellow or more reddish skin, every child, every human being begins its life with this color. So we meet in a way mankind with this newborn child, and it is quite a religious experience when you see how the child learns to walk, learns to speak, and learns to think. We have these 3 steps which are connected to this being who was in a way born or brought on the way in the original Christmas, connected to Christ, who said about himself, I am the path, walking. I am truth, speaking, and I am life, thinking. So we have this connection to mankind in every child. And so we can think of a gift from Christmas, that admiration of the child and this ideal of a human brotherhood, which as an ideal our time needs so much. And I think all of us can try to work in these holy nights to deepen our experience of the holy nights. And maybe most of us will not come to this vision of the sun through the earth, but maybe go on the path in that direction. And so I would like to end by, oh, no, I did something wrong. I would like to end by reading a verse where Rudolf Steiner spoke about this experience of the sun in midnight. And he did that in several lectures, so it was something important to him. And I wrote that up in English. So it is, behold the sun, at tear midnight hour, built with stones in the lifeless ground. Thus in decay and in the night of death, find the creation's new beginning, young morning's strength. Glory in the heights, the eternal word of God's. Shelter in the depths, the powers of peace. In darkness dwelling, create a sun. In matter weaving, know the joy of spirit. Yes, these are my thoughts, or what was important to me concerning the challenges of our time for Christmas or for the Holy Nights this year. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Johannes. Very potent and very wonderful for this time of year as we approach Epiphany, and the words that you read about peace to humans of goodwill on the earth. I really found you bringing that to life for us. So very much appreciate. Do you have some time for some questions, Johannes?
Yes, and maybe I should show you, because some people might want to look at that, to show you the quotes. That I have here. So this article by Jürgen Schmidt is published in the circular of the medical section in 1996. Of course, everybody has that on his desk. David Steindl Rast, often called Brother David, Deeper Than Words, Living the Apostles' Creed is a book. Goethe, the two poems, The Mysteries and Dedication. And the lectures by Steiner I quoted is the 5th of January, 1924, and about this early Rosicrucian initiation. And then this lectures about the poem The Mysteries, December 25 of 07, and about the sun, Behold the Sun, that was from the lecture of December 17, 1 year before in 06. Okay.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for all of that too.
You're welcome.
Let me move to, do you want to leave that up for a little bit so people can copy it down?
Yes, maybe that is.
And, or if somebody is quick and has already copied it down, perhaps you could put it into the chat for us. If anybody has that already, we could copy and paste it into the chat.
Wait a minute. Now. Did it work?
I'm not.
It only went to one person.
Okay, yeah, do it to everyone.
Yes. Whoops. don't know how to do that.
Well, if you send it to one person, maybe that person can now copy and paste it to everyone.
Yes, I can't change that. It just, here, now I have it.
Okay. If you could, folks, if you want to raise your hand by clicking on reactions, and you can see raise your hand, and then I will call on you. And when you've been called on, you can go back to reactions and lower your hand.
Waldemar asked something about goodwill.
Yeah, so Valdemar, I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Valdemar is from Brazil, Sao Paulo area. Thank you, Valdemar, for joining us.
Well, I wrote the question in the chat. It's the same one, Johannes. Vielen Dank für deinen Vortrag. Es war sehr, sehr schön.
Thank you. Danke. And he wrote the question in the chat about saying something about goodwill. I think the problem which is indicated with these words is that many of us have very good intentions. And the question is whether these intentions can come to fruition, to the will, so that really something is happening. And we all know how difficult that is. So yes, even in conflicts, even when there is a war, the wars in Europe in the last century, both sides started the war with the words, with God. So they had good intentions, but they didn't fit into reality. And I think this is a task that you find a way how good intentions are congruent with the reality of life, and that they really come to life, come to work, reach down to your will. I think this is the problem indicated there. I don't know whether that's an answer, but we know, at least we all know the problem, that good intentions and goodwill are different things.
So Valdemar, another question. Oh, Julia, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hello everybody.
Hi.
Thank you, Johannes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Yes, you mentioned these wars during last years, and you said that almost all these wars were religious or
Ethnic.
of this kind. Ethnic, yes, but I myself personally felt this year like I was on the war concerning this COVID situation, this war between vaccinated, unvaccinated people.
I know.
And can you say something about it, or if it's an appropriate question?
Yes, of course, when we think of this message of peace, we experienced in the war you mentioned, definitely not peace. And even if it is not in some cases in Germany it comes to, and I think in other countries too, it comes to threats to kill someone and so on. But even if it's not going that far, it is a question of peace. And sometimes it is a real dangerous question. For example, I experienced in a Waldorf school close to Dornach that they had real difficulties to hold the collegium of teachers working together, to hold them together in their souls, because some thought vaccination is, so to speak, a duty, everybody should do that, and others thought it is impossible and a violation of my body and my rights, and that even led in some schools to a split in the collegium and teachers leaving the school. And in that we see that even if it's not leading to death or something like that, it is destroying communities, and by that destroying possibilities of work, fruitful work, in that case with children. And so I think it is something where we can look at with the background of this message of peace. And so you are totally right. And I think the biggest task in communities working together is, can we keep up our work and our main intentions through this tension?
Thank you. So Florian, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I was reminded when you spoke of the sun at midnight a few times of Rudolf Steiner's work between 1907 and 1914 with the Freemasonic ritual work, which was carried out in a lodge where you entered through the Joachim and Boaz pillars, the red and the blue on left and right. And there were 3 altars there. The altar in the east was related to the morning sun and is called the altar of wisdom. In the south, it was the altar of beauty and love, had a sun over it. And that one in the west then was the altar of strength with the setting sun. But in the higher grades of this Freemasonic work, there was a 4th altar that was in the north, and it was dedicated to the sun at midnight.
Ah, yes.
Now, this sun at midnight involves seeing the sun through the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And Rudolf Steiner describes how it's especially at Christmas time in these holy nights that potential to see that sun at midnight is available. But this isn't the light that the physicists talk about and measure. Could you say something more about the quality of that light and what it signifies?
Oh. At first, I would like to mention that these pictures of the 3 and the 4th altar, that of course is related to the 3 kings and the, how you call that?
In Goethe's fairy tale.
In Goethe's fairy tale, and in the mystery in the birth of Christ, the 3 kings visiting the newborn child, and then we have the 4 of them. with child and the three kings. I think it is difficult, at least for me, to just describe what spiritual light is or how it might be experienced. What I think is, okay, when you read How to Get Knowledge of the Higher World, there is a certain footnote. When Steiner wrote about colors, the vision of spiritual vision of colors, there's a certain footnote. And there he said, it is of course not so that you see yellow like you see yellow with your physical eyes, but that your soul has a similar experience like it has when you see yellow with the physical eyes. So when we transform that to light, we can think of what is our soul experiencing when a space around us or a room around us is bright. When we can see something, that means we feel the possibility to orientate ourselves, to find something what we are looking for, and to go somewhere where we want to be. And that is much more difficult in darkness. And so I think when I think about spiritual light, there should be a quality which in our souls, which has this sort of possibility to orientate ourselves in our spiritual experiences, to find there what we are looking at, for what we are looking for, and to go where we want to go, to move there in a sort of free way. So that is the way I would approach this question without describing an actual experience, though that is, I think it is possible to find this quality in meditation. Don't know whether that is an answer, but the direction. And thank you for this contribution of the Freemason work or the cultural work of Steiner in that time.
So Johannes, a question might be along the lines, if you could speak about the role that sacrifice has to enable human beings to will. Is it merely seeing this sun at midnight, or is there something before you see the sun at midnight of something you're willing to sacrifice? Along the lines of the throne sacrificing and throughout history, we see people needing to sacrifice. What is that, that you can sacrifice?
Yes, this is an interesting question. Maybe everybody can contribute to that. Yeah. That is something I like to think of sacrifices like a spectrum, because on one hand, even when you just do daily work, you sacrifice something of yourself to make that possible. So that is quite quite usual in our lives. When we work, we sacrifice something, and then it is a next step when we look not only at work, but maybe at educating children. Then we sacrifice something. And the higher we come into the consideration of the spirit and the spiritual world, the deeper these sacrifices become. And I think the highest sacrifice we can learn about is this sacrifice of the thrones to begin the evolution of the earth, and where they sacrifice their own being. And things like that can happen in biographies, but I think it is quite rare. And I would like to add that a sacrifice out of abstract thinking can be misleading. When you think, for example, you have a certain possibility to do something and you sacrifice that possibility, maybe it's a pity because this thing didn't happen. So sacrifice can be a difficult thing, and you need to be quite sure that this is the thing what is right for you to do. And I'm sure that when we go for this path for beholding the sun at midnight, there are sacrifices on that path too. But I'm not in a situation that I can describe them and can say you have to sacrifice this or that.
Thank you. Yeah, Adriana, if you want to unmute, thank you.
Yes, Johannes, I'm sorry, but I missed your whole talk because I thought it was an hour later. So maybe I speak about something that you already spoke about. But with our group, we are reading the Gospel of St. John and the relationships to other Gospels. And then I read, first, we must recall that spiritual processes really underlie all physical processes. And then later, Rudolf Steiner say, men will grow weaker and weaker unless they believe in the spirit. For
can
otherwise,
you read it again? Sorry, can you read it again?
Men will grow weaker and weaker unless they believe in the spirit. For otherwise, they deliver themselves over to their inherited tendency. They themselves have, after all, affected this weakening of the spiritual element, because everything here concerned depends upon their attitude towards spirit. So that this believing in the spirit and Christ is so tremendous important. And I wonder if this is why we have this whole epidemic, because I notice in my surroundings here in America, it is pretty good, you know, that people still go to church and their faith and their spirit, that there is a spirit. But I noticed in Europe, and I go pretty often to Europe because my family lives there, that it is not so important there anymore because it is so materialistic. And that sentence, the first sentence that Rudolf Steiner say, that spiritual processes really underlie all physical processes. I'm worried about that. And I think, what can we do for humanity with this lacking of with lacking of spiritual processes?
Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting question, and even the question what it means that in Europe the churches become less and less important, and there are some thoughts I have about that. One is that the people don't go to the church doesn't mean they don't have a relationship with the spiritual world. I don't know exactly how it is with the churches in North America, but there were so many big grave mistakes of the churches during the last, not only the Inquisition, but during the last century, with abuse of children and things like that, that I know people who just because of that turned their back to the church, not their back to the spiritual world. And
yeah, you're right.
So I think what one can do, or what I think is what I can do, or what I think I should do, is to find a way to experience something in this direction of a religious experience and make that accessible to other people, so that it is not only like I believe that that is true, but that I know out of my own deeper experience that there is truth in it. And how to develop that, I think that is an important question, because as we know, even in North America, many people go to the church, but they go there because that's what one does. So the question is, can we strengthen this deep experience of something spiritual?
Yeah, maybe with meditation, because a lot of people like to meditate.
Yes, that's definitely one example, and of course one can deepen that. And yes, I know people who can do that quite well. Yes.
Thank you so much, Johannes.
Thank you for the question. Yes.
Yeah, well, with that question and all, I don't see any more at the moment. And so I want to express our gratitude to you, Johannes. Florian, are you raising your hand before we end? Or was that accidental? Florian?
Yes, I had another sort of picture that arose with regards to this light. In the megalithic cultures, they had these dolmens, which were usually a very large stone that was placed on a few pillars, and they were fairly low to the ground. And of course, the megalithic, the Druids had a special relationship to light. And my own view is that these were places to meditate on the light that passed through the mineral, through that rock, and be able to perceive the etheric quality of light. And there's another picture that arose, was that Rudolf Steiner described how the plants, through their flowers, take in the light, and through their roots, they transmit a part of that light to the center of the earth, where the common ego of the plant world is centered. And he says at Christmas time and the Holy Nights, there's a special relationship between the mineral and the plant kingdom. And I'm wondering if this sun at midnight also has something to do with this gathering of this golden light that the plants transmit to the center of the earth. But also this dolmen experience of the rock being a filter to the physical light, blocking the physical light, and being a training for these persons who are on a path in the megalithic culture to experience the etheric more powerfully.
Yes, I think that might be possible, though what the plants are doing, and what that is, I think, more connected with the life of the earth. And this experience of the sun at midnight as an experience, I said that during the lecture, maybe very shortly, this is an experience, as Steiner describes it, which means the birth of Christ in our soul. So in Christmas happening actually in the soul of man. And that seems to me a little bit deeper than this etheric approaches of what the plants are doing, or what the old Druids experienced in the shadows of these stones. Though I must admit that I would like to understand or experience that in a deeper way, what that meant with the stones and their shadows.
Thank you, Johannes.
Yeah, again, thank you very much. For those who hadn't noticed, I made a mistake about tomorrow being sponsored by the Chicago branch. It's being sponsored by the London branch. But I hope many of you can attend that as well tomorrow. And Johannes, this is one of those special moments. I'm always delighted to be able to hear one of your talks. And
thank you, Andrew.
Done it once again for me. I think I can live with this the whole year forward. So thank you so much. I don't know if Andre wants to say anything more before we close. And
yeah, I would like to thank everybody for joining us and joining our program during 12 Holy Nights. And we're looking forward to see you again. Please stay tuned. Thank you, Johannes, for your outstanding presentation, and Andrew for hosting. Thank you so much. Happy New Year and happy Epiphany tomorrow. Thank you, guys.
And thank you, Andre, for insisting.
Yes, thank you, Andre, and for the work of the Chicago branch in providing these offerings.
Yeah, Florian, by the way, I got to contact to you. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for attending.
yeah, these were very, very special. Thank you so much, Andre, and all the rest, and Mary Spalding, and all for all the work you've done there.
I want to thank the Chicago branch too, and Andre for all of the Holy Night presentations. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Carol. Thank you, Carola. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you, Andre, and thank you, Andrew, for everything that you're always doing. Is very appreciated and important.
Thank you, Yaya. Yaya from London. Thank you, Yaya.
All right. Well, feel free to unmute and say goodbye, everyone. And
yes, please.
Yes. Goodbye, goodbye, and a happy, good year.
Yes.
To all, thank you.
Thanks, Johannes.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Johannes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.